Thanks, Steve. Morning, church. Are we all well? If you read this week's notice, you'll see that the topic I'm talking about today is conquering conflict. And Steve, this message is especially for you since you generate conflict. So if you have your Bibles, turn to James chapter 4, as we'll be working out of that passage this morning. But conflict occurs all around us, doesn't it? In all sorts of shapes and forms. When we think of global conflict, we have a couple of wars which make the news quite regularly, but I Googled about wars that are going on in the world at the moment, and depending on what definition you use, there's about 3 different values they had. I think the one that most of us would say is the common definition, and there's over 50 wars in the world at the moment. If you go to a slightly broader definition, then there's over 100 armed conflicts going on in the world. It's amazing, isn't it? Then you have things like political conflicts that go on. Our government has a little bit of a conflict with Rarotonga at the moment, and that makes the news. We have, within politics, you have a minor party currently that has had some internal conflict going on that makes the news regularly, but my experience says that every political party sort of cycles through their turn at having some internal conflict going on. And of course, you have the conflict between those parties, and then you have employer-employee conflict. And again, in the public sector, that's been making news of late, where you have people working for the government, whether it's teachers or nurses or people in the fire service, police, whatever it is, and they're all saying we need better resource, we need better working conditions, we need more money, and the government is in conflict with that, saying we don't have any more money to do this, what you want. And so there's a division between them that creates conflict. And then we get down to things like conflict between our friends, or conflict against our siblings, or conflict between our kids or our spouse. These are all conflicts that take place. And some conflict needs to happen. When we actually look at the Bible and we go to what the Apostle John said, he said, "For this reason Jesus came to overcome the works of the evil one," or to destroy the works of the evil one. That, friends, is conflict. And we are called to follow in Jesus' footsteps. And whenever we see the enemy destroying, hurting people, sickness, all these sorts of things, then we are actually called to engage in that conflict, to see people set free and bring release in their lives. Isn't that right, church? Some conflict needs to happen. But what I want to focus on this morning is relational conflict. Relational conflict. And all of us go through times where we've got people that we know and we end up in conflict with them in some form or other. And so what I want to talk about this morning, when we say about conquering conflict, it's how we can win the relationship, even if we end up losing the war or the battle that we're in with the conflict. Are you ready? Are you excited? Maybe be a little bit nervous. So if you go to James chapter 4 and we read the first verses, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Great starting point. In fact, if you look at the Greek, where it says fights and quarrels here, the actual Greek word means wars and battles. It could be translated as wars and battles. And what's the difference between a war and a battle? Yeah, battle is a part of a war. Or a battle might be something which is for a specific time and place, whereas a war is the general whole thing. And when we're in relationship with people, we can have wars and battles. We can have specific things that we're in conflict over. But if we let that grow, it becomes a war, and the whole conflict can actually destroy the relationship, and it becomes a bigger, wider thing. So we have wars and battles that we can be in. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Okay, this whole bit of passage here is trying to help us understand why we have conflict. So we're going to spend a bit of a chunk of this morning's talk getting to understand why we have conflict. And to begin with that, what I want to talk about is what are we actually looking for in a relationship? What are the important ingredients we're looking for in a relationship? Because in understanding that, that'll actually help us to understand what's going on when we get into conflict, relational conflict. And there's basically two things, I believe, that we are looking for in relationship. One is love, and one is trust. And when we look at love, what we're wanting from that is, we can break that down into perhaps three things. So we want people to accept us for our uniqueness, for who we are. Every one of us is unique. We're different. And we want people to accept us for that. The second thing we're looking at under the category of love is we're wanting to have worth in the relationship. We're actually wanting people to value who we are, to actually want to be with us, so the relationship isn't one-sided. We want to have that worth and know that we're actually valuable to the person that we're relating to. And the third thing that we want under the category of love in a relationship is we want to feel that we belong, that we actually have a right to be there. And of course, the only place or the only person that we can have that completely is with Jesus. You know, Jesus accepts us as we are. He designed us before we were even thought about by our parents. He knew us, He designed us, He developed us, He made us who we are. And so He accepts who we are, warts and all. And of course, He puts incredible worth onto who we are. He died for us. He gave up His life for you so that you can have a relationship with Him. He puts immense worth onto who you are. And when you choose to have a relationship with Jesus, you belong. He calls you son, daughter, part of the family. You belong. And that is love in completeness. And then when we think about trust, the other thing that we're looking for in a relationship, one of the things we want in trusting the person we're in relationship with is consistency. We actually want to know that when we turn up into this relationship and interact, we're going to get the same response, same reaction. Some of you may have been in a relationship where or interact with someone where on one day you go up to them and they'll say, "Oh, great, good to see you, how are you?" And the next day you go up to them and say, "Oh, it's you again." It's not consistent. You know, when we're wanting to trust someone, we want to know that our interaction with them is consistent. And then we want to have transparency in the relationship. I like the word that Simon Dodge uses when he talks about intimacy. We want to know that we can be open with the person that we're interacting with, that we can trust them with our feelings, with who we are, that we can let them in and that we can see into them. And that we don't have to have a mask up being artificial. And then we also want to know that they are going to be fair. that the decisions that are made, that the things that we do together, that there's a real fairness about it, that it's not this person over here has been treated one way, but I've been treated differently. There wants to be a real fairness with that. And again, the only person we can see this with completely is with Jesus. You know, Jesus is completely just and fair. And he looks into us and sees everything about us. And he is consistent in all that he does. He doesn't change. He can be trusted. And of course, all our other relationships that we have, we'd like to be the same. The reality is none of us are perfect. And this is where we start to get now into what causes the conflict and what is in behind some of the conflict we experience when we're interacting with people. And every single one of us has baggage. Carl, that also includes you. Not pointing at your wife. Baggage is a word that's been commonly used in the world today for quite a few decades, which indicates the way that we see things, the way that we treat things, the way that we interpret things through partly our DNA that we were born with, partly through our experiences as we've been growing up, or our experiences through trauma and that sort of thing. And it creates these ways that we interact, and we all have it. We all carry baggage. Look, let me give you some examples of what baggage might look like. You might have a sense of abandonment, that you're always concerned because of some experience you had when you were young, perhaps, that when you're in a relationship, that sooner or later the person you've got a relationship with is going to leave you. And that can cause you a way to interact or react or respond to what's going on. And it may mean that that fear that the person is going to leave you means that you might come across as quite needy with the person, or that you might do things that you wouldn't normally do because you're afraid that the person's going to leave you. Another type of baggage that you could have, it's almost limitless the sort of baggage you can carry. But just giving you some examples, is you might have a tendency to like everything being in order and structured. And you could be in a relationship with someone who is just free and easy and doesn't really care how everything is. There's a bit of tension that could happen there. Carl and I go to the gym. I'm picking on you a little bit, Carl. Yeah. Carl and I go to the gym, and when we get to the end of our gym session, we're doing our abs, and so we get the mats out, and Carl likes his to be... In fact, I think if he had a tape measure... I'm not so much like that. In fact, sometimes I don't do it because of my friends. Sometimes I just feel like I'm going to put my mat down like that. Denise and I both have our own medications, and Denise likes to cut hers, or have hers row by row, and then cut off the rows and put it away so it keeps it all neat and tidy. One of the medications I take is aspirin, and it has the day down beside it, so I follow that because that way I know if I've missed a day of medication. My other ones which are on a strip, I don't like following the rules. I like to go all over the place just for the fun of it. I don't like being controlled. We share Panadol. Do I need to say more? We have different baggage which can create conflict. One of my baggages that I have is, for as long as I can remember, I just feel like I'll always be average. It's something that's ingrained in me, the sense that I'll be average. And one of the things about that is it causes me to strive at things I become focused on to be the best I absolutely can. And sometimes that's at the expense of a relationship. And a number of years ago, early in our married life, I got into running. And I'm not a natural runner. So I pushed harder and harder, and I got to the point where I was running 160 Ks a week, 6 days a week, to get as good as I can. And I got pretty good. Of course, Robert Holland is probably one of our best runners in the church historically. He almost represented us at the Tokyo Olympics. No? Oceania Games. He almost went and represented us in the marathon there. A lot better. My times aren't bad, but Robert's got better times than me for various distances. But I got reasonably good. Thing is, to get that, and you're doing 160 Ks a week and running, it takes time. And so I'd be on the road at 5 a.m. in the morning. This is in our house in Aylesford Street where we lived. And I'd go out the back door, and I'd lock the door, and I'd put the key in the letterbox, and I'd be gone for 2 hours doing 21, 25 Ks that morning. One of Denise's baggages that she has is she's got a fear that something bad is going to happen. The positive thing about that is that it drives her and drives us to praying for things. That's a really positive thing about it. We pray a lot more because of that. And I appreciate that about Denise. Back when I was doing the running though, because I would put the key in the letterbox every morning I'd go out, it created a habit. Denise would hear me doing that, and she'd be lying in bed 5 a.m. in the morning, terrified that someone was going to get the key and break into the house. Conflict. And one of the issues we have is we don't understand each other's baggage. And so, although Denise was lying there terrified, I'd just ignore it. I'd say, I don't understand. I don't see the problem. No one's going to break in. There's a fear that something was going to go wrong wasn't my baggage, but it was Denise's. And for years, I never even listened to that. We all have baggage. Is this starting to make sense? Is some of you starting to think about, I can recognise a few things. Maybe not what I've talked about, but you're starting to think about some other things that you have as baggage. And in reality, the baggage itself is not the problem. The baggage is part of who we are. It's how we respond to the baggage that is the problem. And it's our emotional response to this baggage when we're in conflict that creates the issues in our relationship. And look, when things are going easy and going well, we don't have to worry about it because we're not in conflict and these things don't raise up. But once we get into conflict, depending on the seriousness of the conflict or how heavy it is, it creates issues. Denise and I have been to numerous marriage seminars over the year, and they often talk about toothpaste. They talk about how one might leave the lid off, or they might squeeze from the middle instead of the end, and it creates this real conflict in marriage. We never understood it. We never understood it. I had my toothpaste, she had hers. There's 4 categories of emotional response that we have when our baggage rise up in conflict. The first one is we start playing the blame game. And some of you, that is a response that you tend to go down, is that you start blaming the other person for the conflict that you're in. And it can exhibit itself by perhaps becoming really angry, verbally or even sometimes physically angry with the other person. You may start calling them names or belittling them or saying, look, you're always doing this, and you're exaggerating the actual size of the problem. Or even getting into the extreme, you might start thinking, look, if you weren't even here or part of this relationship, I wouldn't have to deal with this conflict. So blame is one of the emotional responses. Shame is another one, which is more to deal with us. So rather than blaming the other person, we start blaming ourselves or experiencing shame ourselves, and we start getting depressed or thinking that we're absolutely hopeless or useless in this situation, or we start getting really needy or whiny, wanting the other person to help rescue us about it because the shame that we're feeling is preventing us from actually interacting fairly. Some of you may recognize those behaviors. For me, one of the ones that I do is control. The third one is control. And that's where we try and control the other person. And you know, when Denise was lying in bed terrified, I'd just say, what is your problem? There's nothing wrong with this. I'm just going to keep doing it. And for me, any of you know the disc profile? You're profiling people, disc profile. So I am decisive, really strongly decisive. Which means I'll make decisions with limited information. And that can exhibit itself as control, and I have to fight this all the time, especially if I'm leading meetings or that sort of thing. And I've another one of the profiles is someone who just likes to make sure everything's talked about and everything's heard, and they don't like actually making decisions. They just want to make sure everyone is. I struggle. And look, when that type of person and my profile get together, we are setting ourselves up for conflict, and we both have to learn how to manage that. So control is something that I actually have to seriously work on. And in anything I'm leading, I have to make sure people are being heard in the meeting before we actually make decisions. And I do have to say, I do sometimes get frustrated when we, within a few seconds I've reached a decision, and a month later we've come up with that decision as a group. But we can try and control the other person. It's one of the emotional response. The fourth one is that we can escape. We can try to leave the situation, and you might experience that when you've got someone and you're having a discussion around conflict, and the other person just ups and leaves, and you suddenly stand there on their own, not talking about it. Look, that's my other one that I fall back into. Not so much getting up and leaving the discussion, but when conflicts occurring, I would tend to try to escape the conflict. For some people, it means that they get into an addiction of some form to come up with an escape mechanism. For me, it was games on my phone. If there's conflict going on, things I wasn't winning in things, I think at least I can go and play this game and feel like I'm winning in this game. So I'd escape from what actually needed to be dealt with. You've gone very quiet. As you're sitting there, can you think about what some of the things that operate as baggage in my life, and typically what is the way I respond? Do I blame people? Do I feel shame? Do I try and control? Do I do I try and escape? What's the mechanisms that I use when we're in a relational conflict? Because understanding is the beginning. And it's one of the, this verse in James talks about, we ask things and we don't get it because we want it for our own pleasures. The things that we are often looking for when we are dealing in conflict is, I want to fix your baggage, or I want you to fix my baggage. Guess what? It doesn't work. The Bible gives us a tool in these verses which does work. Are you ready? So if we come down to verse 6, but he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. Submission and humility. These are the tools that God gives us when we're dealing with relational conflict. The attitude of we want to win the relationship, not necessarily the battle. Now, these verses talk about humbling ourselves before, or submitting ourselves before God, humbling before Him. What does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? We could make sure I don't sit on that. I'm just humbling myself before God now, submitting myself to Him. Submitting, humbling. What are you doing? I'm just submitting myself before God, being humble. But what about all these jobs we got to do? What about these things we need to discuss? You need to come and actually do that. No, I'm just spending time submitting, humbling. It's okay. Here's the thing. Sometimes we think that doing something with God goes that way. But normally, the outworking of that is that way. The outworking of submitting and humbling ourselves for God is the way that we interact with people. Let's just look at an interesting collection of verses in Proverbs. The writers of Proverbs, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, decided to put these verses together, and it's in chapter 18, starting at verse 19, and I call it a relational sandwich. A brother wronged is more unyielding than a fortified city. Disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. Okay, we've got a relationship there, a brother. And if there's an offence or a wrong, there's a real problem going on. And then it says, from the fruit of their mouth, a person's stomach is filled. With the harvest of their lips, they are satisfied. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit, which is one of my favourite verses. Then he says, he who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favour from the Lord. So when we're talking about relationships, a husband and wife relationship is one of the closest that we can get as far as a demonstration of the relationship between us and Christ. Ephesians talks about that. Ideally, it's supposed to be. So here in this relational sandwich between the relationship between a brother or a close friend and a husband and wife, it's saying what we say matters. What we say can bring life into a relationship, or it can bring death into a relationship. What we say matters. So when we're coming back to the verses here in James where it talks about we need to submit and humble, what we say matters. Is that making sense? So here's the key. Step 1. Identify what's going on with yourself and acknowledge that. So if you've got baggage that's causing this problem, identify it, own it. So, for me, look, I realise that part of who I am is a sense that I am always average in what I do. It's part of my identity of who I am. Then also acknowledge what that causes. And I'd say that can cause me to strive really hard to be the best I can at something, and at times that is at the damage of another relationship. And now we have an understanding of what's actually going on. And we can acknowledge that. And we maybe that we need to acknowledge that to the person that we're actually having conflict with. But here's the power of words. We can say, but I choose not to act out of that behavior anymore. I choose to identify myself as what Jesus says about me, and I choose to respond in the way that he says I should respond. And if our behavior before was a tendency to blame, we might say, and I'm going to choose to encourage you in this. If our tendency was shame, we might say, but in Christ, I've been made a new person. Old things are past, all things are new. If our tendency was to control, we might say, and I choose to actually stop, pause, and listen to you. What's going on for you? And if it's escape, we might say, I choose to be present through this and to stay here and talk it through. Does that make sense? And actually speaking that out. And giving the other person we're in conflict with to actually share what's going on for them and actually pause and listen and not try and be that focused on ourselves or try and fix their problems, their baggage, or try and have them fix our baggage, but actually just listen. See, the Bible talks about the fruit of the Spirit, and if the band would like to come up. One of the last fruit is the fruit of self-control. And we're really quick to want God to actually take stuff away from us, maybe to take the baggage so we don't get into difficulties. But the Bible actually has a different solution. He gives us the fruit of self-control. And the only person that we can control, the only person that we can make a difference in is ourselves. We're not there to change the person we're in conflict with. We might be there to listen to them, to hear what's going on for them, but the only person that we can control in the situation of the conflict is ourselves. And we can start speaking out. We can ask God to help us with this. We can start speaking out the way that we're going to respond in conflict. What the other person does is entirely up to them, how they respond. We can only control ourselves. And if we start doing that, if we start applying that, we may find occasionally we lose the battle. but we win the relationship. Will you stand? Well, I'm aware that as I've been talking this morning, some of you may be thinking of relationships where you're still feeling pain and hurt that have caused that maybe historically you've experienced difficulty. But if that's you, we would love to pray that God would bring some revelation into your life about what's going on and help you actually surrender that, submit that to Jesus and have God speak. Some of you may be in a difficult relationship or in conflict right now and you're not sure what to do. And we can pray that God will bring some revelation into that. Others of you, of course, may have other things that you want prayer for. We'd love you to come down and receive prayer as well. The band's going to sing something.
A song.
Yeah. Awesome. They're really good at that. And can I encourage you? A relationship is worth winning more than the battle. If you need prayer, we'd love to pray with you. God bless.